This gospel account of the Passion tells us that at this very hour, the 3 o'clock hour, on a Friday, Jesus of Nazareth was executed between two known criminals on a hill outside the city walls that was called Golgotha. The death of any person, innocent or guilty, young or old, causes us to reflect on this moment in history. Everyone knows that we are mortal. We grow up knowing that common sense, and that someday we shall have to face the day when we shall die. Our lives will be at an end in some way, somewhere. History and life will continue on and on as each of us fears that we shall one day pass from this world into extinction. And this is a natural fear that every human being has faced throughout history. But different civilizations have thought about death and expressed their views in different ways. We know thousands of years ago, in the time of Moses, that the Egyptians built lofty pyramids for their pharaohs, equipped with all kinds of evidence of a future life the pharaoh might enjoy, a life after death. And so others have thought of that too. For the Cynics and Stoics, life is ended at death and there's no tomorrow. Live for today. For all of us, though, who are pausing at this very hour of Christ's death, whether we are physically present here or in any church or at home, near or far, we are meditating on Christ's death, and we want to see it as the best way to understand our own dying when the time comes. The man who died on the cross on Good Friday was a full human being. Jesus, a man like us in all things except sin. But it is clear that his was a death that he freely accepted. He could have avoided the confrontation with his enemies and escaped. In fact, on several occasions, we in late Lent mark the parts when he withdrew from his enemies and hid himself. But not this time. By his deliberate will and action, Jesus is giving new meaning to our own death, as he was also doing to his own death and the life that led to it. Now, about 400 years before Christ lived, the Greek philosopher Socrates lived in Athens. He was condemned to death like Jesus for something that probably was never a crime, because he tried to instill in the youth of Athens a sense of thinking, of rational thinking and logic, philosophy. His last conversations took place in the prison in Athens with a frequent visitor, Socrates' favorite student, a fellow named Plato. And so Plato recorded his last dialogues with his mentor, Socrates. And he quotes Socrates in some of his last statements before the death penalty was executed. Socrates would say that the whole purpose of human life is for a person to become like God. And those who follow God will become like him in some way. Very prophetic. He also stressed the purpose of all human intelligence, of all thought and reasoning, is to philosophize, meaning to think about the whole meaning of your life, to prepare yourself for one event that will always come, to prepare yourself to die. For his part, Jesus understood the full meaning of human life, and he embraces it his entire being. His death is a way of encompassing each of our own deaths in a fuller way. Jesus is saying the purpose of our life is to learn to give ourselves away. He began that episode last night in his conversations at the Last Supper. He was teaching us to make of our very selves a sacrifice, an offering of ourself to others. Socrates never went this far, but Christ did. He was trying to express that when we give ourselves away to others, it is a way of dying. Christ's death on the cross, which was voluntarily accepted, matched his entire life on this earth, a constant movement, a continuous death to self, death for the sake of others, supreme act of love, giving himself always away. We are told tonight that the Apostle John stood at the foot of the cross and received the responsibility for caring for the mother of Jesus, who brought him into this world. It is John himself who recalls those last words at Jesus' final supper, Christ saying, "There is no greater love than to do this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." And later St. Paul, a convert to Christ, also perhaps influenced in some way by Socrates. You can see that Greek thought creeping in. St. Paul claimed rather bravely, if we resemble Christ in his death and his burial, and Paul was speaking about what happens mystically in our baptism, we imitate Christ in his death and burial, so we shall be like him in a like resurrection. And so on this Good Friday, we're praying for one another and for Christians throughout the world, that the dying of Jesus will restore in each of us the meaning of my life and your life on this earth, and eventually my joyful passing from this life over to him, so that death gives way to life.